Good evening all and welcome. The life of a dispatcher is not easy, as you're about to find out. As you can imagine, dispatchers do not deal with light-hearted subjects. Some of these stories are going to be very difficult and raw. So, if you really don't have the grit to continue, I strongly advise against listening to tonight's video. But go check out one of the other 1000 videos plus I've made. I'm sure you'll find suitable entertainment in a previous installment. But only if you're truly ready and have been forewarned, then let's proceed and let the darkness truly take control. In the heart of my city, there sits an abandoned hospital. It stood in practice for nearly 60 years before closing its doors for the very last time in 2010. No trespassing signs and private property signs littered everywhere and are on every external wall of the building, encouraging people, of course, to stay out. The city hoped that it would remain untouched. However, that didn't last, as it eventually became a hotspot for teens and young adults to explore and party. It wasn't too long after that rumors of the hospital being haunted circulated around the city. Once city officials caught wind of the stories and break-ins, they decided to hire a security company with two 12-hour surveillance shifts so that the hospital could be monitored 24 hours a day. Despite the enforcement, people would still break in, and depending on the situation at hand, the police will get called. Neil. The call came in around 3 a.m. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, it's Neil from RS Security. I think I need an officer to swing by or something. Okay, can you tell me why you need assistance? The number and address on my screen were well known to me. It wasn't out of the ordinary for security to call for backup. I'm at the old hospital and I don't know how to explain it. He sounded nervous, like it was his first time calling. Start from the beginning. We'll take it from there, okay? Oh, okay, well, I was checking the cameras like I'm supposed to do and I was flipping through them and I saw some guy standing in the nursery ward. The guy who trained me told me about some crazy dude who likes to hide in there. No one really knows how he gets in. I'm only a week and a half on the job and it's my first day alone, and he told me that if I see the guy, to scare him out the building, but, are you still there, Neil? I asked, breaking the sudden silence. Yeah, sorry. I thought I lost one of the feeds, but it's all good. That's okay. So, you were saying that you tried to scare the guy out the building? Then what happened? Oh, I went out to try and find him and kick him out. But when I got up there, my flashlight ran out of juice and the lights aren't allowed on because people think the hospital's still open. Anyway, I walk into the nursery ward and I was yelling for him to come out and that if he didn't, I'd get the police involved. And that's when he started laughing. I could barely see anything, so I just followed the sound and out of nowhere someone grabbed me by the arm and pushed me to the floor. It all happened so fast, but I could still hear the crazy guy laughing down the hall, so I bolted out of there and there's no way it was him. Did you recheck the cameras when you got back? Yeah, I looked at them again and the guy was still there, but there's no one else on that floor. I checked and rechecked. And I know you're probably thinking I'm crazy or something, but I have scratches on my arm from the other person on that floor. There's no way it was the other guy unless he can be in two places at once. There's no way. I could hear the panic in the guy's voice as he spoke through what he encountered. Okay, so the scratches came from someone else grabbing your arm and not the man who was laughing, correct? I asked, making sure I was following what he said. Yes. I could hear his frustration with me. The crazy guy's still there. I'm watching him right now, but the other person in the building is somewhere. Wherever they are, I can't find them with the cameras, and I'm sure as hell not going back up there. The police need to handle it now. Okay, I've dispatched the police, and they should arrive shortly. Are you okay? Do you need paramedics for your arm? No, I don't think so. It stings, but I think I'll be... He cut himself off mid-sentence. Neil? Is everything all right? The man, he's just gone. I've been watching him this whole time, and I looked away for a second in my arm, and he's gone. Wait, where is he? Oh my god, oh my god. What is it? What's going on, Neil? He's in the stairwell. He's running. What if he's coming for me? What do I do? I don't have a weapon. What do I do? What do I do? You're in the office, correct? Is the door locked? Get inside. I heard him put down the phone and quickly shuffle to the door, and then he screamed. There was a bang on the door, another scream, and then a thud. And then I could hear footsteps and static infiltrate the line. Neil? I spoke hesitantly into the static, and waited a few seconds until the call was cut off. Police arrived on the scene about a minute after the call ended. Neil was found in the security office, unconscious with a minor injury to his head. When they had asked Neil about what happened, he apparently had no recollection. He said the last thing he remembered was getting to work. The officers swept the entire building looking for 2 possible suspects, both of which could not be found. They also said they checked every possible entrance that they knew of, but there were no signs of anyone entering the building. To this day, I receive calls from security about the same man in the nursery ward. However, after Neil's incident, they no longer leave their security office and immediately call the police. People still don't know how he gets in, but assume that he's living somewhere within the abandoned hospital. Seems like a good idea to tear down that building. I'm a relatively new dispatcher. I've been working for about 1.5 years in a small town. I work 4 10-hour shifts, and 3 of those I am alone for the entire shift, working police and fire. In the last 1.5 years, I've never lost anyone. For some reason, my welfare check calls had all been false alarms, and my medical call EMRs were always able to get them stable enough to wait for an ambulance. Those calls were few and far between for a start, but all turned out okay, and I was still very green in that respect. About 2 weeks ago, I had someone call from out of state in near hysterics because a woman in our town was sending cryptic statements to her via text about ending her life, but no one knew exactly where she was. M had made statements about not being far from home and something about a cemetery, and that she was going to use a rope. The family member said M had made an attempt about a month prior, but law enforcement arrived and saved her life. I called the last person M had seen, and then called every person M was known to associate with for a vehicle description, clothing description, mood, anything that could help me. I also started a ping on her cell phone and had officers checking all local cemeteries and requesting help from the sheriff's office when the ping was located just outside our jurisdiction. Eventually, the sheriff's deputies found M unresponsive in a cemetery a 2-mile south walk from the ping, but it was too late. It was the first person I'd ever lost, and I beat myself black and blue replaying all the calls in my head. Everything anyone had ever said, everything I did. Did I do everything right? Was I fast enough? What if I were faster? Did I miss something that could have helped find her in time? We had a picture of her in our system, and I dreamed about her for at least a week. Tonight I get a call from a suicide hotline, advising of a male with a sharp object walking through town with the intent to end it all. That night, with M came rushing back, and I started to get almost nervous, but also was determined that this one would be different. I pinged the phone and got officers moving, looked up his file to see where his past incidents had occurred for maybe a clue of residence. I even got a tracking dog to try and locate. As I'm on the phone requesting my 3rd ping update, an officer called out with him and he's okay. He's emotionally upset but physically okay, and I felt the air go out of me. Once they cleared, I had an officer come in and watch the comms so I could step outside, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off me. I saved this one. I felt like crying, and I don't know if that's normal. Maybe I'll actually sleep tonight without seeing M's face. I know it sounds like a pointless story, but no one really understands what my career is or what goes on with it. I just needed to share it with you all. About 5 years ago, I was volunteering in a listening service that was only aimed at helping children of up to 18 years old. A lot of training was required for this role. Even though it was an anonymous phone call service, if a child presented us with a dangerous situation and we had their permission, we could call the appropriate authorities, like police or social services. After a few weeks, I was feeling settled in and had taken many calls. The majority were just kids joking around, but there were many tough calls too. Most evenings after I had finished my shift, I would feel so overcome with emotion that I would fight back tears on my way home in my car. Having a small child of my own often made it harder to forget about. One phone call in particular really startled me, and to this day I often think about it. It was about 9:45 p.m., 15 minutes before my shift ended, and I was sitting around. I hadn't taken a call in over an hour, and time seemed to be moving so slowly. My phone rings, and a petite, soft female voice says, "Hello." I introduce myself, giving a fake name as I always do, and tell her a little bit about the service and what we would do if someone is in danger. She says almost immediately, "I need help. I'm babysitting my younger sister. She's only 2 months old and I'm 9. She's diabetic. She's turning blue. My mother and father have gone out. Please help." I felt as though all my training had gone out the window. I was panicking, but tried my best to keep my thoughts clear and my voice clear. "Go outside and get help. Go knock at the neighbor's house and call the nearest adult you see." The little girl talked me through her steps and said she had the baby in her arms and was about to go out the street. Listening to the noise of the traffic and the sounds of the night air, my heart was beating so fast, aching to know what was going on, and feeling so helpless. I could hear the little girl speaking to someone but couldn't make out what was being said. Next of all, a lady came on the phone. "I have them. Hello? Hello, I have them both. I'm going to take them to the nearest hospital." I thanked the lady, and she told me that help was on the way. I ended the call and gathered myself. I informed my supervisor. She was as shocked as I was when I gave her the details. She called the hospital in the area that the girl had given me, and also the police. And after an hour of filling in the mandatory documents, my supervisor followed up the inquiry about the call we had received, and they said they had no such cases. Finding it quite strange, we finished off writing the notes and shut down for the night. It wasn't until next shift the following week, which I was grateful for, as I needed the time off, when I returned to work after my week off. My supervisor called me into her office and informed me that she had gone through my notes on the call I received and had gone to search the system for the similar scenarios and keywords. She told me that every caller has a profile, and the girl who had called was a frequent caller, and that she wasn't a little girl, but a lady in her early 30s in a psychiatric hospital, and she likes to pose as different people, but mostly as a child. This creeped me out, considering the nature of service and the fact that an adult was abusing it. This information angered me and also disturbed me. I felt silly and naive, as I had believed this girl's story. Over the next few months, she called a few more times under different descriptions, and always posting as a vulnerable person. I wasn't there for much longer, but that story always gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. I spent nearly a decade working with a large law enforcement agency in my home state as a police dispatcher. Instead of answering calls made to 911, my job was to remain in direct contact with and consistently provide information to officers and other first responders. During a specific graveyard shift with very few calls in its entirety, I dispatch officers to an escalating yet non-physical domestic dispute. In short, it concerned child custody, which can undoubtedly shorten tempers and set parents on edge. A father had violated the hours of his visitation rights by showing up intoxicated at 2 a.m. at his now ex-wife's house. She, of course, was not too pleased, prompting the emergency call when he refused to leave. Normally, the response time for emergency incidents is based upon a priority system, depending on the circumstance and whether or not a person is in imminent danger. However, since it was a slow night with no incidents holding, I dispatched 2 available officers immediately. They arrived within minutes, separated both parties involved, and de-escalated the situation. As previously mentioned, the father was legally intoxicated, according to an administered breathalyzer, and had driven his truck to his ex-wife's house. But since he had legally parked on a public street and wasn't behind the wheel when officers arrived, he wasn't charged with drunk driving. I ran his information and background, and except for a prior DUI, driving under the influence, and a couple of minor offenses, his record was otherwise clean and he didn't have any warrants out for his arrest. The primary officer, writing the report, that happened to respond was the patrol shift supervisor, my sergeant, a very nice man who earnestly tried to help every citizen he could, including cutting them some slack if an arrest was avoidable. He let the man off with a trespass warning and even gave him the opportunity to call someone to drive him home or use public transport and return for his truck the next morning, after he'd sobered up. Incredibly gracious considering the circumstances. But this wasn't good enough. The man opted for an Uber driver and the officers left after one had arrived. Apparently the father had told the Uber driver to drop him off just around the next corner and proceeded to call 911 again, demanding to speak to an officer. My sergeant was made aware of this and asked me if I would call the man back to see what else he wanted. Since it was extremely common for dispatchers to make callbacks, I had no problem with this request. The father proceeded to berate me at the top of his lungs, and I'm going to censor the incoming profanity. He called me, amongst other things, a worthless piece of trash, and he said he called me to help, but that I was siding with the woman, and to send the officers back now. I'd heard these expellatives hundreds of times and was unfazed. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir, but I can send officers back to you. What's your location?" He proceeded to call me every name in the book, including several racial and homophobic slurs, and asked me, "What's your location?" "Never mind, I know where your building is and I'm heading over there to mess you up," amongst other insults. He informed me that he had utility chains and gasoline in his work truck and threatened to not only blow up our communication center, but drag my burning body around the parking lot behind his truck. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I advise you not to make these kind of threats. Everything you say is currently being recorded." He replied saying, "You think I give a hoot? Send your officer back out here and I'll string them up. Go ahead." I happily and maliciously complied. I informed my sergeant over the phone of the father's allegations. He, as well as 5 other squad cars, responded. They found the man waiting by his pickup truck, back out in front of his ex-wife's house. I'll admit this guy had a pair on him. He was promptly arrested for the following: violation of a trespass order for reappearing at the house, misusing of an emergency line, harassment of public safety employees, i.e. for threatening a 911 call taker, terroristic threats for threatening to blow up our building, and resisting arrest once he was placed in cuffs. In summary, tread carefully, deadbeat dad. I'm armed with a phone, a radio, and a criminal database, and a patrol sergeant, and I'm not afraid to use them. This last Thursday night, I took a call of a woman screaming, "Oh my God, no, please don't, stop," screamed over loud bass and a car engine. She wasn't answering any questions, stayed on the line trying to get info for over 6 minutes until a male voice called her the B word, for calling the cops, and then hung up the phone. I pinged the phone, but it was moving too fast through multiple jurisdictions, and by the time I got the results on the first ping, it was already out of our venue. I checked previous history on the phone number, but there wasn't any. I ran the phone through a database we use to cross-reference information on phone numbers, names, criminal records, and restraining orders. Nothing. I also tried to get subscriber info so we could maybe contact someone who knows the owner of the phone, but it was a prepaid with no info on it. I alerted the highway patrol and the neighboring jurisdiction, which is notoriously slow if I get any response at all. It took 7.5 minutes just to get to their emergency line, but without a vehicle description, it's pretty unlikely they're going to do anything about it. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Pull over every car with a loud bass in a particularly bad or high crime area? I continued plotting the recurring pings I set up, but they all stopped in one of the worst parts of the neighboring jurisdiction, with a radius of 800 meters, basically 3 blocks containing 18 buildings, some with multiple floors. I tried calling it back a few times, but each call went straight to voicemail. Then my shift ended and I went home. I don't usually take calls home with me. Work stays at work is my motto, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. I shake it all off at the door, get in my car, and go be a good dad and husband. But this one's sticking with me no matter what. I could tell you what it's like to listen to a child tell you about his mom being beaten by his dad in front of him, and I had to testify in court about that call. I could tell you about listening to a family perish screaming in a fire after an accident. I can tell you that if someone is reporting an OD happening in front of them, it has a particular note of desperation unlike any other call. Or what it's like to hear someone end their life on the phone with you, or try and comfort an adult who's just found their parent deceased. I've listened to a mother scream as she realized she accidentally ended the life of her infant. I've talked to frantic parents whose children were taken. I've been at this job for a while, and I can tell you the time I spoke to a 15-year-old who had been shot and left for dead in a field because he tried to sell his older brother's weed. He survived. Or the guy who had been knifed multiple times and passed on the phone, with 20 seconds before officers and paramedics showed up. Those were the rough calls, but at least I had some resolution to them. This one? Nope, and I probably never will. Was it a woman being taken? Was her life being ended? Or was something horrific happening to her against her will? I have no idea. Could have been a partially disturbing song and a pocket dial for all I know. Was she found? Did she report what happened after? Is she alive now, or is she in an abandoned building? I don't know. Is there someone frantically searching for her right now? Did I ever meet her? Maybe. But I will never know. Not knowing is the hardest part of this job. I go from the start of one emergency to another in seconds. Questions, dispatch, help, hang up and repeat. In the rare case something really bothers me, I can usually ask the officer via his computer how it went, but I think I've only ever done that 2 or 3 times. This call? I'll never know how it ended or what happened. I did everything I could, only for it to mean absolutely nothing anyway. Now I'm sitting at home on my days off. My baby is crying, and my wife wants to tell me about some story or other she read on Reddit. Taxes are due, and I'm behind on paying bills a day or 2. And all I want to do is go somewhere quiet, drink bourbon until I'm not stressed anymore. But that's a bad route to go. I've seen others do it, and I'd never forgive myself for letting my family down like that. So instead I'm a little quieter than usual, and maybe not as attentive as I'd like to be, but I'll be fine for another day or 2. Just gotta suck it up and go back to work. 15 years until retirement. I was a police dispatcher 1 year in college for the campus police, Worcestershire Polytechnic Institute by the way. It was generally really boring, a small nerdy school and not much happened. There was a sheet with codes on it. The codes represented certain kinds of calls. Though I didn't remember the code numbers nor what they represented, It might have been like Code 3 is a fight, Code 19, officer down, whatever. I took it upon myself to memorize the list. After a while I had it down. Then I never needed to look at it again. One night, as I always worked third shift, an officer radioed in. Code 42, Main and Elm, 33, Brock Road. Code 42? I don't remember that one. Plenty of codes. Half of them were benign. They included common things like filling up your gas tank or noisy complaint. It wasn't always something horrible, so I wasn't too concerned. I casually looked at the sheet. How am I supposed to know what to do without it, you know? But I couldn't find it. Sometimes if it's a bigger deal and the other officers know they need help, they don't wait for me to dispatch them. Another officer will just say, I'm coming, that sort of thing. So when someone did that, I became alarmed. Then another officer did it, then another one. I was flipping out at this point. I had no idea what the problem was and I couldn't do anything. So I was going to call 911 and say send an ambulance, something happened, and while you're at it send a fire truck just in case. Someone was going to die, I knew it, and it was all going to be my fault for not knowing the code, not finding the sheet, and not having the guts to ask what it was. And then I found it. Scanned down at the bottom, 42 was the biggest number I'd ever heard. Dunkin' Donuts run. Those cops scared the life out of me. I have taken a number of frightening, stressful, and disturbing calls as a 911 operator. These include, I watched my roommate end his life, and he's still breathing. The roommate lived long enough to be transported but died shortly after. My husband has PTSD, and he has a firearm. In that one, I managed to get the wife and child out of the house safely, but the husband didn't make it. Or the non-English speaker with a choking baby. There are delays in getting interpreters conferenced in, perhaps the sound of a gunshot in the background, but the list goes on. But the majority of the calls we process are routine. Even the emergencies we have, the cavalry at our fingertips, and the capacity in most cases to get the right help to the right location in the right amount of time. This means that heart attack dads, or car accident mums, or fighty, drinky neighbors usually aren't even a blimp on the emotional radar. I don't say this to minimize the level of crisis for those involved, but it helps explain how we can be saturated without becoming, well, saturated. In reality, many of the calls that we have had haunted me, and have been the unexpected or heartbreaking details in otherwise routine calls. The world-weary 8-year-old, same age as my youngest, calling in a disturbance between mum and dad, telling me mum's a crackhead, the guy at his Christmas tree lot who had just been robbed at gunpoint, telling me the bad guy just kept apologizing the whole time he did it. The elderly woman who on a routine medical call told me she wishes people who can still walk would get outside more, and that she would give up anything just so that she could walk again. There are the calls I take home with me. As much as many high crisis type of calls, someday it's the best and worst of humanity. The rest of the time it's just turtles all the way down. I was a Coast Guard Marine radio operator. The worst call I took was from a boater that witnessed a float plane crash into the ocean near a community not far away. The plane was owned by a company that one of my close friends is a pilot for. He slammed into the water at a 45-degree angle at full power. It was severely damaged on impact and ended up upside down and sank very quickly. It was clear after a few minutes there were no survivors. After the initial call from the boater that saw the plane go down and was heading over to help, I was inundated with calls from other vessels and mariners and was very busy for the next 30 minutes, and it was another hour after that before I was relieved from my position and could call my friend to find out if he was still alive. That was the longest hour and a half of my life. Other calls I've taken include gunshot victim at a dock, trying to call very quietly so not to alert his assailant, a woman screaming and panicking after her husband collapsed on their sailboat. Mayday, mayday, we're at Point Pleasant and sinking, and then nothing. and a man in a panic reporting there was a drunken fight in a remote coast community and someone was struck in the head with a hatchet, which is now stuck in his head. I was part of a citizens police academy for my city, and the dispatcher told me her best and worst stories. But I'm only going to share the worst. A man called and said his girlfriend had ended her life. Police responded and found her in the tub, having bled out. After interrogating the boyfriend, this is apparently the timeline. Girlfriend is pregnant and early 20 years old and didn't want to have kids, at least not then. This wasn't her first time, and she did the same thing she did last time. She got a hanger and tried to take care of it. Again while he was playing video games. Well, she apparently messed up and bled out there in the tub. After he hadn't seen her for a while, he checked and found her in that state, and then went and called the cops. She essentially stabbed herself while he was distracted by video games and bled out. The thing I'll never forget though is that one, it happened before once successfully, and two, that they disposed of the first body in a trash bag and were meant to do it at the same time as the second. He was specifically playing video games with headphones on, which is why he didn't realize things had gone so badly until it was too late. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county, so we see and hear strange things all the time, but this story gives me chills. There's an abandoned house in a rural area of the county that sits a good way back in the woods. Every so often our dispatch will receive a 911 call from the land at the residence with nothing but white noise. The dispatcher asks if anyone's there, but they never get an answer. Since it's an open 911 call and we know the address, we have to respond, and every time we do, there's no one there. The oddest thing is, there's no electricity or any signs of wiring going to the house. Every deputy that's been there gets a feeling of dread just by being on the property. I'm not sure of the history of the house. I don't know what could be there. Anyone have any thoughts on it? And on my way out of the property, I found a vehicle driving on the wrong side of the road. So I'm at the jail finishing paperwork on the DWI. But why don't we take this back to how it all started? To preface this, I consider myself to be pretty rational when it comes to odd situations, but I'm open to the idea of the supernatural. I wanted to share this with you because I thought some of you might care for it. Anyway, this was my first time walking up to this place, so it was definitely an experience. The trail is gated off, so I had to walk to it. It's about 200 yards back in the woods through very dense brush and trees. There was nearly zero light on the trail, and I had to really watch my step even with my flashlight. I jumped a deer on the way up, and it scared the living hell out of me. Once I turned the corner at the end of the trail and saw the house, my heart started racing, and I honestly felt like something was there with me. I started messing with my flashlight, phone, and notepad trying to get a good photo of the verification of the house, when I just felt that sudden urge to leave. It wasn't a feeling of, I shouldn't be here, but more of, you need to get the hell out of here now. Having been in a very stressful situation in the past, I learned to trust this feeling. I got the best photo I could and walked away down the trail towards my car. I'm almost embarrassed to say that I legitimately felt something was following me. I made my way back to the car, sat in it, and pointed my spotlight at the trailhead, waiting to see if something would come out of the woods. Fortunately, nothing did. I sat for a minute and caught my breath while I reviewed the photos, hoping it was sufficient, because I did not want to go back. I'm about to go off duty, so this is it for today. I'm really interested in what the hell happened to this place. And after a bit of researching, I did. I have some history on the property. It was built in 1890. The first deed on file was registered in 1901, and the property has been in possession of the same family that owns it today. From what I can find, the current owners of the property live out of state, but have previously lived either in the house or on the property some years back. The area it's in was a boomtown during the late 1800s, but fizzled out shortly afterwards due to lack of profits from the mines. Other than that, I haven't found anything that makes the property stand out. On a more speculative note, the house sits a lot closer to an area where a Native American tribe was known to reside. I don't know what's happened there, but there's definitely some spooky activity. Now that we've heard some of the true horrors that dispatchers have to go through, I have a little bonus for something for you to hear, so that you can really appreciate what it's like. I'm feeling tired and a little more burnt out than usual today. Kid had me up late, so this is probably a little more negative than I usually am. That said, the way I'm feeling right now accurately sums up how you'll feel a lot as a dispatcher. Can you type, talk, and hold 3 to 4 conversations at the same time? You'll learn to. The hours suck. The pay is usually around minimum cost of living for your area, but there's plenty of OT everywhere. You'll work with people who are in various stages of idealistic and enthusiastic, slowly transitioning to burnt out and bitter, and a crap ton of people with the same last names as command staff and officers who make you wonder, how do you not get fired on a near hourly basis? Stay long enough, and you'll eventually call these people boss. Now for the big con. You'll hear the same messed up stuff if you do this long enough. A mother watching her son OD sounds drastically different than a woman screaming for any other reason. You'll talk to domestic abuse victims. Sometimes they're getting beat. Sometimes you'll know them. Sometimes you may hear people die in a car wreck or burn in a fire. Sometimes people will end their lives while they're on the phone with you. Sometimes you'll hear the fresh reaction of the parents of an infant that stopped breathing in the night. And the most frustrating part is as soon as you disconnect, you get a call from someone upset about a dog barking, or a neighborhood's grass being too high, or a guy not bothering anyone but looking suspicious. And you'll have to treat each caller exactly as professionally as the last. Then after all that, you'll take all the attitude of young cops who think you're a secretary and clueless member of the public, who really have no idea how hard your job is, and yet assume you're somehow lesser for doing it. That's the male side. If you're a female, you'll be assumed to be someone chasing badges, and you'll have the added difficulty of calling people in and treating you disrespectfully because they assume you're a secretary and a bimbo, and not an experienced professional. Or just a cop, none of which is true, by the way. We have female officers working light duty here. Or just not a cop, none of which is true, by the way, as we have female officers working light duty here. And as well as career dispatchers who just happen to have breasts, and sometimes they're 10 times the dispatchers of their male counterparts. But there are some pros, because if that's the way I feel about it, then why stay? Well, in spite of it all, you do it to help people when they really need it. That's a good feeling. You are sometimes the vital link that leads to taking a bad person off the streets or getting help for a vulnerable person before someone victimizes them or they hurt themselves. Occasionally you'll meet an older officer who says, "I can't do your job." And you know what? That means a lot. There's also the fact that if you do it, it's a permanent job and there's security for as long as you want it. It's transferable, and with my experience at this point, I'm confident I could move anywhere in the country and find a job that will pay the bills. If only just, whenever I want. Typically, emergency response and public safety is resistant to change. That can be a con, but it also means pensions are commonplace and benefits tend to be pretty good. You've also got to consider that you might hear an officer dying while on your radio. Every other call I mentioned pales in comparison. You'll never forget it, and you'll always wonder what you could have done differently, if anything, to change the outcome. Ask yourself if you're the type to be able to handle it and still return home with your family and be present with them. This really isn't for everyone, but if you decide to become a dispatcher, best of luck to you. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and remember to ask to be treated fairly and with respect. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's journey into Dispatcherville. Can be quite rough, eh? So I included that last bit, like I said, because it gives a very real account of how tough it is just doing that job, which is something rare that I don't often find while finding stories. So it was a very insightful thing that I really wanted to add. It really demonstrates how tough it is. And I think they're often overlooked. And they shouldn't be, because they have a really, really hard job. So a thank you to any dispatchers listening for all your hard work. And I hope you get treated right at work. Alright then. Ooh, rough video, eh guys? Thanks as always to my lovely patrons and members' names on screen. I think this video has been demonetized, as they always are. These ones anyway. You have to mark it in a little check, and I've had to put that this has stuff in it, so yeah, it's fine though. I really wanted to share these stories with you, and they need to be heard. Stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.